Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the SDP podcast. My name is Dr. Patti Weiter, and I am very, very excited to introduce you all to Dr. Jane Dutton. Jane is a professor emeritus at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan, and both in business administration and psychology. Jane's research is focused on understanding how to foster human flourishing at work, looking at high quality human connections, compassion in the workplace. And I would be taking up all of my time if I told you all about Jane's career, because she has a wealth of research and books that she's written, and co-founder of the Center of Positive Organizations. And so I'm just very excited to have her with us here today. So welcome, Jane. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you, Patti. I'm really delighted to be here.
Yeah, so I really want to just give an idea to our listeners about, the field of positive organizational psychology might be one that people have not really dug into a lot. So we look a lot at leadership development. We look a lot at employee engagement, but this specific area of positive organizational psychology, I think, is very fascinating. How do we help people not only to function at work, but to flourish at work? So I'm wondering if you could just describe a little bit about kind of like what motivated you to have that as your specific kind of area where you wanted to focus your research and your career.
Yeah, well, that's a long story, but I think it's helpful to say I'm what you would call an organizational researcher. That means I love and am fascinated by all things organizations. And so we really are looking at applied psychology inside organizational settings, mostly settings where people work, but it can also be other settings where people reside, where they're not necessarily working. And part of the question we're trying to ask is, how can you design or think about organizational level features that are going to shape people's experience of flourishing? And by flourishing, I just mean a state of optimal functioning where people not just perform well, but importantly, have a high level of well-being. They're, in the best case scenario, they're actually even getting healthier over time. And I got really interested in this partly because of I would say 25 years into my 40-year career, I was deeply concerned about how much students were suffering. Students who were working in various contexts were coming into classroom and sharing their experience of suffering in the workplace. And it wasn't only that I thought we could do better. I thought we were actually in a lot of work organizations doing a lot of harm. So that's one of my motivation is just, how could we turn this around? And then in some ways our aspirations aren't high enough in terms of, again, good performance is fine, but it's not enough if you are actually harming people's health and well-being. So that's part of the motivation. The other part is, I'll just speak more personally. So I'm a grandmother. And I'm deeply worried about what society is going to be like for my grandchildren, even my children, but my grandchildren especially. And I feel like at the level of just positive psychology, if I just understand individual conditions of flourishing or well-being, it's not going to scale well-being or flourishing at a fast enough rate to cultivate the human capacity and capability to deal with these huge pressing problems that our society is facing, whether it's climate change, social injustice. I mean, I could go on and on and on. So I feel this deep sense of urgency, not just to try to improve the conditions of work in organizations, but importantly, to think about how can we use organizational levers to scale this more quickly and more extensively to create the resources the human-based resources that we need to tackle these intractable issues that are hitting workplaces, but basically hitting us in all aspects of our lives.
Yeah. So we exist in all of these systems, and one of the ones that influences us a lot is our workplace. And so being able to help people to flourish in the workplace also helps them to flourish at large, which might improve our society, like you said, on a faster rate than one by one by one.
Yeah.
Especially, thinking about the number of hours people spend in a workplace setting, and the portion of their lives that they spend in settings like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I want to just, talk to you a little bit about some of the things that you write a lot about. And one of them being high quality human connections. So I love this idea of being able to optimize the ways that we're connecting with people. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, kind of like what you know about why that's important to talk about, but then how do you do it? How do you really create high quality human connections?
Yeah, I mean, this is like, it's some level, it's so basic.
Mm-hmm.
We are born to connect with each other. An infant is, dependent on its mother or its caregivers from the moment it pops out into this world.
Mm-hmm.
And so it should be no surprise that if we can form more of what I would call these life-giving interactions, that's why I'm using the word connection as opposed to relationship, because relationships are composed of these micro moments of human connection. If we can create, again, a context like work context where it's more feasible, more desirable, for people to build these high quality connections, then again, back to what I said earlier, it has such a dramatic effect on our bodies, on our thoughts are part of our bodies, on the way that we are motivated to behave towards others. I mean, it's probably the most important resourcing condition of any condition in psychology or sociology. So, the more research that I did with my doctoral students about the physiological, almost instant impact of having these connections where people feel they're seen, people feel a sense of mutuality, people feel a sense that they're being regarded positively. It affects our immune system instantly. It affects our cardiovascular system. It affects neuroendocrine system. I mean, all these things which resource us really importantly. So, again, I have lots of different hats, but if I put on my hat of, I was a strategy researcher for my first 7 years of my academic life. And what that means is I'm interested in how do you create sustainable capabilities in organizations that allow them to succeed at the macro level repeatedly. And the quality of human connections is not only important in terms of our everyday experience of work, and whether we, again, we experience ourselves as getting healthier and more effective over time, but it creates these non-imitable, non-imitated by competitors, sustainable advantage in organizations. Because if you have more high quality connections, people coordinate better, they collaborate better, they're more creative, they're more adaptable. I mean, these are the kinds of capabilities that are competitively really advantageous to organizations. So again, I'm passionate about this because of what it does to human beings. And they deserve this. They deserve to be in connections with other people that are life-giving. But I'm also, as an organizational researcher, very interested in us creating sustainable competitive advantage. So how do you build them? I mean, there's a lot of, I wrote a whole book on this. And the research suggests that you can kind of cluster the pathways for building high quality connections into four major buckets. One is respectful engagement. That is all the things that we do in interaction with another person that conveys a message of worth and value. So there's a whole bunch of things like listening and presence and communicating affirmatively. There's a whole bunch of things that we can do that taps into that pathway that builds more high quality connections. But there's also what I call task enabling, or you could think about it more simply as helping. So it's all the things that I do towards you that help you achieve whatever you're trying to do. And there's all kinds of things that make it easier for us to help other people and build high quality connections that way. The third bucket is trusting. So that's all the things that I would do to send you the message of that I am reliable, I'm dependable, I care. Those are sort of major contributors to trusting. And finally, last but not least, because it's actually really important across all living species, is play, as we often build higher quality connections in the conditions of play. So, if you were interested in helping an organization or a team flourish more, have the people within it flourish more, you could think about these different pathways and kind of take an assessment of currently how well are you doing these things, and then set goals about trying to make them better. And what I know, since I know your audience is really interested in kind of interventions and going into organizations and making them better, I mean, one of the ways that we have found it to be really helpful for people to think about lifting up the quality of connections is to take a routine, an organizational routine, a routine like, by routine, I just mean repeated activity. An organization like meetings would be an organizational routine, or onboarding would be an organization, or selecting or developing. I mean, you go in these repeated, and you sort of look at how is that routine currently being conducted, and then try to, again, apply this lens to say, okay, how could we reimagine the way that this routine is done so that there's more respectful engagement, more tasking, more helping, more play. And it just gives people a way to start to reimagine and uplift the overall high quality connecting, since these are repeated activities, by actually trying to reimagine or re-engineer this routine. So I think that's, as I've taught this and, worked with managers trying to do this, they found that doorway in to how you can build more high quality connections to be a helpful doorway.
Yeah, I mean, like in thinking about scaling, that feels like a really practical way to look at, not just the way one manager might interact with one employee, but to do it in a way where it's embedded in your system. Like, this is the way that we do things, and it's intentional, and it's based on making that connection better. So not just based on like onboarding, for instance, not just based on making sure you have access to this and that you check, but really creating a space for connection that can impact the person, that can impact the organization. I just think it's really, there's a lot of potential there for good.
I think so too. I mean, again, I don't think that there's not a lot of research on this. So, I mean, there's the scattered pieces. But again, I'm as an organizational person, the theory makes sense, and all the ingredients in terms of the micro bits of research should add up to that. And that's actually, you mentioned compassion. I mean, our approach to look at what we call an organization's social architecture, which includes routines and roles and networks and leaders' behaviors, came from us trying to understand, trying to explain why some organizational units were more compassionate than others. And, people often go, well, we've got to make the culture more compassionate, or we have to have more high quality connections with the culture, or, culture is so darn hard to change. It takes and it's so amorphous. And what I love about this perspective on the social architecture, which was developed with my wonderful colleagues, Monica Warline and Jacoba Lilius and Jason Kanov and Sally Maitlis. There was a whole team of us that studied this in the context of compassion, and found, again, it to be a really, you couldn't explain why organizations had sustainable compassion unless you looked at all the elements of this social architecture. But that lens helped us sort of then go over to high quality connections and say, okay, how could you reimagine roles? Like, how about, let's just use my example of myself as a professor in a university. No, there was never been a role description that has included compassion for my students.
Yeah.
Role description does not include that. Well, when COVID hit, and the suffering of students was everywhere in the classroom, finally people started to define their roles, and leadership of the school sort of said, as part of what you should be doing, faculty, is being compassionate towards the students. Well, what if you took every role description and helped people reimagine that role? So included, quality connecting with other people, or compassion, or whatever it is that you value. What the value of thinking about these structures like roles and routines and networks is that they are pretty consistent over time. They have lasting power. Whereas people move in and out of roles, and people move in and out of networks, and people move in and out of routines. But this social architecture framework helps you think about these enduring, flexible structures in organizations that, again, as you said, Patti, allow us to scale the uplift.
Yeah. So when we describe a role that we want to hire someone into, or maybe we've got someone into and we're kind of crafting a little bit more of their role, maybe doing an evaluation with them and talking to them about what we expect, bringing in the idea of compassion as a part of what they do, whether they work in security or healthcare or education or whatever their industry may be. Yes. That there can be a bit of compassion in the way that they approach anything they're doing.
Yeah. And I got to say, where I'm nodding my head so enthusiastically, because I did this study with Amy Wisniewski and Galai DeBeba a long time ago when they were students at Michigan, of the hospital cleaners at University of Michigan. And that study is what gave all this momentum around the idea of job crafting. But we learned that a significant number of those hospital cleaners were redefining their role as hospital cleaners to include healing of the patients and the patients' families. And they did this despite the fact that they had a ridiculous workload, and that they, in fact, in certain cases would have gotten punished for it. But it was such an important part of the meaning that they made of their work.
Yeah.
So I think, again, if you look at, I love this new book that, I'm going to forget the name of it. It's called The Wonder Drug. That's the name of the book. It's written by two physicians, and it's about pulling together all the data about basically what we want to serve others. And so if roles could be redefined in ways that allows us to more vividly see, the positive impact that we're having on others, it lifts up the positive interrelating.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
In my mind, I just think of so many aspects of how that would increase psychological safety, because you're really tied to the purpose of the work with your, boss, whoever that may be. And it reduces burnout. No doubt that it would make you more, sense of belonging to your community at work, and aligning your values with your work, all of those things, so that it's less transactional. It feels more fully developed when we empower employees and leaders to have these sorts of really intentional conversations about the roles, the routines, the structure. Because I feel like sometimes, we're developing one leader at a time, or, cultivating maybe that small scale. And then these are kind of structures that could be embedded in, that would allow them to be, more broadly applied.
Yeah. No, I don't think it should be either or. You really need
the small scale matters.
Right. But if you just do the small scale, again, back to my urgency, we're going to get little pockets that are going to be flourishing. But if flourishing is a generative state, that means, and that Barbara Fredrickson's done a lot of work on this, if it's a state in which we are more resourceful per moment, because again, we're unlocking resources in ourselves and others and stuff, then I have more hope for my grandchildren.
Yes.
I have more hope for workplaces so that they can be more generative places for human beings.
Yeah, that they can really help us to grow and develop as humans, not just make a paycheck and, maybe develop in our careers in a sense, but to really fully embrace our humanness at work and help us to thrive. Yeah. Yeah. It's exciting. And I think,
it is
like you said,
exciting.
it's urgent. So, I think my last question, I love when you've talked about some of the things that can, that you can do in an interaction that's 60 seconds or less, that it doesn't, we talk about the large structures, but that there are actually really meaningful changes that can happen, that we could make a business case for, but also it's just a really nice way for humans to connect when you're intentional about the way that you interact with someone, even if it is, a short interaction. So I'm wondering if you could just give an example of any kind of interaction that you think, to create more high quality in that interaction.
Yeah, I mean, probably the most important thing I could say is first moments matter. So what happens in the first 40 seconds? And that the 40 seconds actually comes from a study that's represented in the book Compassionomics, which is the same authors that wrote The Wonder Drug, where they talk about how 40 seconds of an high quality connection between doctors and patients has significant effects on both over time. One of the most important things you can do is prime yourself before you even talk to a person, to expect the best in the other. Because we form such first of all, everything in our body is communicating to the other person what our beliefs are before we even open our mouths. The way our mirror neurons start talking to each other, and way we sort of pick up very thin slices, what psychologists call thin slices of behavior. What you transmit in your face, in your greeting of your touch, all those things, even on video camera, like what is the first way, that little square, what are people seeing? Because that is already going to condition people to respond to you in a particular way. So that would be the first thing I would say before you even have the interaction. What is in your mind about that other person? And if something not so good is in your mind because of what you have to do or your impression about that person or whatever, again, condition yourself by the story you tell, the image you have, whatever, to think about the best in the other, because your conversation and your connection is going to be much better as a result of that. The second thing I would say is, how do you greet the person? And in particular, what questions do you ask? What's the first, David Cooper Ryder et al., who I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with here, has this whole idea of appreciative inquiry. And there's like appreciative greetings that we can do, appreciative inquiry in the first question that we ask. And again, how can we get to a meaningful place with a person really quickly where they can trust us and think the best of us? And that means showing curiosity, showing genuine interest, showing genuine care. Like just the way you say, how are you? I mean, in the way that expression is conveyed can make a huge difference in how the connection unfolds. And people are really good at picking up, how are you versus how are you?
Do you really want to know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
and
the
these
way that you phrase it, even the words could be the same, but the tone of your voice.
Yes. Yes. So those are two examples: the priming and the first, the questions that you ask. You convey interest in a meaningful way. Do you greet another person with an affirmative glance? Do you smile or you respond? So I mean, there's just like a zillion things.
Yeah. I love though that we can kind of, make it a bit concrete so that if someone is struggling with that, maybe they want to be more genuinely connected to their employees, let's say, but they might kind of not feel like they have the intuition there, that you can, kind of note these certain things that can help them make it a more genuine connection.
Well, I think asking people for feedback, I mean, we often don't know how we come across. And so having, there's more and more of these one-on-one developmental conversations. that people are having at work. And, if you're the person giving someone feedback, you could solicit feedback about how am I coming across to you? Are you getting the fact that I'm interested and I care? Or the things that I could do that would be more helpful? Because we can, I'm a parent, I guess I already hinted, a grandparent, but
yes,
I have all the good intentions in the world. And it wasn't until my kids started really doing some truth telling about the way I was coming across was very inconsistent with my intentions. So having that feedback, I think, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that tip because I think that is something that maybe we miss, or that we, again, there's a lot of potential there to just really create these conversations, these connections that build into, a larger scalable change at an organizational level, but then even beyond in our communities. So I just really love all the work that you're doing, and I appreciate your time being with me today. And thank you for joining us on the SCP podcast. And I hope you have a beautiful day, Jane.